Well, good afternoon. It's Saturday, April 2nd, 2022. Welcome to the Mountain Torah Fellowship Shabbat teaching for this 11th day of the first month on Yahuwah's calendar. Start us with a shofar call.
That's awesome.
All right, and that concludes our teaching for today. I'm going to share the screen, and those that care can join us in the Shema that we'd like to speak. Join me if you care to. Shema Yisrael, Yahuwah Elohim, Yahuwah Baruch Shem Kavod Malkut Leolam. Hear, O Israel, Yahuwah is our God, Yahuwah is one. Blessed is the name of his glorious kingdom for all eternity. And you shall love Yahuwah, your God, with all your heart, and with all your soul, with all your strength. These words which I am commanding you today are to be on your heart. You are to teach them diligently to your children. Speak of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise. Bind them as a sign in your hand. They are to be as frontlets between your eyes. Write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Every once in a while, I'll take just a moment, talk to why I choose to run through these verses at the beginning of our teaching. It's a very important distinction, I think, between the walk that we're on and many who are believers in their mental assent. And the word there, Hero Israel, Shema, it translates as the word hear, but in Hebrew, verbs are action-oriented, not passive. And so the hear really means to hear and obey. In other words, hear and do that which is necessary to carry out that which you have heard. So that is what the Shema really means. It's a call to action. It's not a call to sit around and listen to YouTube videos only. So it's a call to hear and to do, to hear and obey. And as we go down this these verses, these words which I'm commanding you today are to be on your heart, and it talks about when you will, what to do with them. You teach them, you speak of them. There's actually some rabbinic tradition that requires or enjoins Jews to recite the Shema twice a day, because in here it says when you lie down and when you rise. So on getting up in the morning and on going to bed at night, is the rabbinic interpretation is that's when you should recite the Shema. I read it differently. I says that you are basically to always have his word on your mind, as it talks about various times throughout the day. When you're talking to your children, when you're sitting around the house, when you're out walking around, and when you go to bed and when you rise. And so I don't see it as a twice a day thing. I see it as a 24/7 kind of thing. And that is our greatest commandment, is to love the Lord, Yahuwah, our God, with all our heart, and with all our soul, with all our strength. And then the second greatest commandment, as Yahusha told the scribes and the Pharisees, who were doing their best to trip him up, is you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself, and on that hangs the entire law and the prophets. So that's really the cornerstones. Love Yahuwah and love your neighbor. And everything else follows from that. You could make a little diagram, all the different instructions in there where they come underneath that. Okay, so that's our explanation of that for the next few weeks anyway. This is the readings that I asked folks to take a look at. It's Parashah 26. We're about halfway through, almost halfway through our Torah cycle, believe it or not, for the year, and that means 8th. We'll talk a little bit about the 8th. And there was, I'm sorry, I didn't distinguish there. The 9:1 to 11:47 is from Leviticus. And then, and we will I'll read some of it, but not all of it. And then 2 Samuel, we actually end up reading most of that, as Stephanie and I were having a discussion about the passage in Mark. So I wasn't going to address it, but it applies. So we will read that and talk about that. And then we'll go into Acts some, and 2 Corinthians, and I actually don't get to Galatians, which is unusual for me when given the opportunity. Talk about Galatians, but we will look at 1 Peter verses. This is the outline. I just like to keep the story going. We're not going to dwell on it, but I want you to know where we are in the grand story of Scripture. There is the unfortunate incident of Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, who were executed, who were smoked by fire. And then we're going to actually spend a fair amount of time on the laws of clean and unclean meats. And so that's where we are in the story. In fact, that's what I chose to call this, Does Yah Care What We Eat? And there's really two related topics here, is what is clean versus unclean, and the other is a description of kadosh, or as we know, holy or set apart. Okay, on the first day of the first month, the tabernacle had been set up, and we talked about that, and the Passover was kept on the 14th day. So the 7 days of consecration for the sons of Aaron, for Aaron and sons, came between, and there remained but a few days before the preparation for the Passover. And so we're talking about the 8th day, which was after the 7 days of consecration. Is there anywhere else that we have an 8th day in that you all can remember? What is that? We have an 8th day here, the 7 days of consecration, and then the 8th day was the day after that. And we also have we have the 8th day of the 7-day fall feast of Sukkot. It's called Shemini Atzeret, or the 8th day of assembly or gathering. And I've run through it before, but in the views of many, eschatologically, the 8th day prophetically represents eternity. We have 6 millennia, the 7th millennium of the millennial reign, and then the 8th day prophetically is one that never ends, is eternity. So that's kind of just a little bit of background on the naming of the Torah portion. It starts out talking about the 8th day, which was after the consecration. Now I'll go back to the share, sorry. I'm going to read, again, I'm not going to read the whole portion, but we're going to start here with Leviticus 10. Now Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, each took his own censer, put fire in it, laid incense over it, and offered unauthorized fire before Adonai, which he had not commanded them. So fire came out from the presence of Adonai and consumed them, so they died before Adonai. Nadab and Abihu are mentioned first in the genealogies. Exodus 6, Aaron married Elisheba, daughter of Aminadab, sister of Nashon, and she bore him Nadab and Abihu, Eleazar and Ithamar. They were Aaron's eldest sons. They had been selected to accompany Moses and Aaron, and the 70 elders in the beatific vision of Exodus 24, 1 and 9, shown here. Then to Moses he said, "Come to Adonai, you and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel, and worship from afar." Then Moses, Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel went up. And then in Numbers 26, we read that Aaron was the father of Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar, as we know. And then it confirms that sometime before that, Nadab and Abihu died when they offered sacrifices with unauthorized fire before Adonai. And we talked about this last year, if you remember a little bit. We're going to just dwell on it for a moment. The question is, what's going on here? One thought is that they were, for lack of a better phrase, this is my wording, full of themselves, thinking of themselves beyond the rules. I mean, here they were in tight with Yah. You know, they got invited up to the mountain and with the 70 elders, so they were kind of part of the in crowd, and they just said, well, we're just going to kind of do what feels good here. So if that still happened today, if people were smoked for being full of themselves, our nation's capital would be sparsely populated. Another thought is it has something to do with the incense. Perhaps it was not prepared according to the directions provided in Exodus 30, the verses shown here. And Adonai said to Moses, "Take the sweet spices, stacte, onycha and galbanum, the spices and pure frankincense, are to be in equal measures. Make a fragrant mix from them, a blend like the work of the perfumer, seasoned with salt, pure and holy. You are to beat some of it into powder and set it before the testimony in the tent of meeting, where I will meet with you. It is to be most holy to you, but the incense which you make with this formula you are not to make for yourselves. It is to be holy to you for Adonai. Whoever makes any like it to breathe in its smell will be cut off from his people. Or maybe it wasn't offered at the right time. Maybe Nadab and Abihu were caught up in the moment of excitement and prepared an incense offering to accompany the shouts of the multitude as they saw the divine fire fall upon the sacrifice. Perhaps they were frightened by the sight of the consuming fire and thought an offering of incense might appease the Almighty. Or maybe they were being disrespectful. Maybe they were drinking on the job, as verses 8 and 9 might lead you to conclude. Adonai spoke to Aaron, saying, "Do not drink wine or fermented drink, neither you nor your sons with you, when you go into the tent of meeting, so that you do not die. This is to be a statute forever throughout your generations." There are other opinions, many other opinions as well, including that they inadvertently set themselves on fire. Clearly, the fire that consumed them was unusual. If you read the following verses, we see that it did not consume their bodies or their clothing. I'm not quite sure what to make of all these various interpretations. Some are rabbinic tradition, which I don't give much account. Others seem to be pure speculation. My approach, which sometimes, while leaving all those possibilities on the table, trust me, leaves me without a clear explanation at first, but is to let the Bible interpret the Bible. Let's take a look at the two verses we read a few minutes ago, with the verse immediately following added, shown here in the King James Version. And Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, took either of them his censer and put fire therein and put incense thereon, and offered strange fire before the Lord, which he commanded them not. And there went out fire from the Lord and devoured them, and they died before the Lord. Then Moses said unto Aaron, "This is it that the Lord spake, saying, I will be sanctified in them that come nigh me, and before all the people I will be glorified." And Aaron held his peace.
I add something to that.
Yes, go ahead.
Did they use their own censers and their own incense?
Took either of them his censer
Oh, okay.
and put fires therein and put incense thereon. It doesn't specify.
Okay, it sounded like they used their own instruments and they
It
brought
does.
profane things into the holy presence.
It does. And I think it boils down to that verse 3. It says, "I will be sanctified in them that come nigh me." So they did something, whether it was being intoxicated, bringing the wrong incense, using their own censers instead of the consecrated tabernacle equipment.
Yeah.
Any and all those could be the part of the issue. I'm not dogmatic about the answer. I rest that something was not holy. I was going to say kosher, but that didn't fit. So something was not sanctified or set apart unto God here.
Verse 8.
I'm sorry?
In verse 8, I was wondering earlier when I read it.
Which verse?
Verse 8.
Verse 8.
Verse 8, okay.
But it's verse 9 where it talks about not drinking alcohol, intoxicating liquor, and so on and so forth when you entertain a meeting, so that you won't die. And when I was reading it, I was thinking, I wonder if the reason that was just mentioned was because of Nadab and Abihu, and maybe that.
Yes, and that's a very common, and I can't say that's not true. Something or some things happened that was not set apart. And perhaps the reason it's not clearly spelled out is so that we don't take one thing and say, oh, as long as I do this, I have to use the right incense, but I can go ahead and be drunk when I go into the Holy of Holies. So I don't know. That's just speculation on my part. I'm doing the same thing they're doing. But there's a variety of reasons that people come up with, and we need to be mindful of all of them. All of them may be part of the answer. So can you write that down as one of your questions to ask when you're in the presence of God, like down the road? I've got, my list is long, so you're going to have to add that. Okay, so we're gonna jump ahead to a passage from 2 Samuel 6 and another from Acts 5, and then we're going to come back to Leviticus. So join me, if you will, in 2 Samuel 6, here too. I'm going to read verses 1 through 11. Now David again gathered all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000. And David and all the people who were with him arose and set out from Baale, Judah, to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called by the very name of Adonai Sabaoth, who is enthroned between the cherubim. So they loaded the ark of God on a new cart and carried it out of the house of Abinadab that was on the hill. Uzzah and Ahio, Abinadab's sons, drove the new cart as they brought it from the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill, with the ark of God, and Ahio was walking in front of the ark. Meanwhile, David and the whole house of Israel were celebrating before Adonai with all kinds of instruments made of cypress wood, with harps, lyres, tambourines, three-stringed instruments, and cymbals. But when they reached the threshing floor of Nahon, Uzzah reached out to the ark of God and grasped it, for the oxen had stumbled. Then the anger of Adonai was kindled against Uzzah. God struck him down there for his irreverence, so that he died there beside the ark of God. David was upset because of Adonai's outburst against Uzzah. That place is called Perez Uzzah to this day. So David was frightened of Adonai that day. Then he said, "How can the ark of Adonai come to me?" David was unwilling to move the ark of Adonai to him, to the city of David. Instead, David diverted it to the house of Obed-Edom, the Gittite. So the ark of Adonai remained in the house of Obed-Edom, the Gittite, 3 months. Meanwhile, Adonai blessed Obed-Edom and his entire household. Numbers 4:15 sheds some light on the severity of Uzzah's punishment. When Aaron and his sons have finished covering the sanctuary and all its holy implements, and when the camp is ready to move out, after this, the sons of Kohath may come to do the carrying, but they must not touch the holy items or they will die. These are the tasks of the sons of Kohath with regard to the tent of meeting. But wait, there's more. Let's go back to Exodus 25. Now you are to make an ark of acacia wood, 2.5 cubits in length, 1.5 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits high. You are to overlay it with pure gold, inside and out, and make a crown of gold around it. You are to cast 4 rings of gold for it and place them in its 4 feet. 2 rings will be on one side and 2 rings on the other side. Also make poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. You are to put the poles into the rings on the sides of the ark in order to carry the ark. The poles are to remain in the rings of the ark, not to be taken from it. You are to put the testimony, which I will give you, into the ark. How was the ark supposed to be carried?
By poles.
By the poles put into the rings on the sides of the ark. How was the ark being transported in the 2 Samuel account?
In an ox cart.
By an oxen pulling a cart. Did the crew transporting the ark know how it was supposed to be carried?
They should have.
Let's pick up the storyline in 2 Samuel 6 where we left off. After David said, "I can't have this thing here," and then he found out that it was being blessed in the house of Obed-Edom. So verse 12, then it was reported to King David, saying, "Adonai has blessed the house of Obed-Edom and all that belongs to him because of the ark of God." So David went and brought the ark of God up from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with joy. Now when the bearers of the ark, how was the ark being carried now? By bearers. Yeah, so they were going it the right way. Had gone 6 paces, he sacrificed an ox and a fatling. So amazing they knew how to carry the ark, as evidenced by that phrase, the bearers of the ark. My personal opinion is that David is fortunate that he was not the one struck down for irreverence, as he is the one that had the ark put on a cart and pulled by an ox, rather than done the way it should have been done. Why Uzzah? Maybe enough is enough. That was the tipping point when the ark tipped. Yah said that's enough. He's slow to anger, but his justice is swift. Okay, one more stop in Acts 5, and then we're going to head back to Leviticus. And I'm going to read through verse 11 here. On the other hand, a man named Ananias, together with his wife Sapphira, sold a property. He kept back some of the proceeds with his wife's full knowledge, and brought part of it and set it at the feet of the emissaries. But Peter said, Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Ruach HaKodesh and keep back part of the proceeds of the land? While it remained unsold, it was your own, wasn't it? And after it was sold, wasn't it at your disposal? How did this deed get into your heart? You haven't lied to men, but to God. As soon as he heard these words, Ananias fell down and died. Great fear came upon all who heard about it. The young men got up and wrapped him in a shroud and carried him out and buried him. After an interval of about 3 hours, his wife came in, not knowing what had happened. Peter responded to her, tell me if you sold the land for this much. She said, yes, for that much. Then Peter said to her, how did you agree to test the Ruach Adonai? Look, the feet of those who buried your husband are at the door. They will carry you out too. Immediately she fell down at his feet and died. When the young men came back in, they found her dead and carried her out and buried her beside her husband. And great fear came over the whole community and all those who heard these things. With Nadab and Abihu, Uzzah, and Ananias and Sapphira, I see a common thread. Yah is Kadosh. His holiness or righteousness demands justice. Sometimes, dare I say often, he is merciful. And I believe we ought to be more amazed at his mercy than his justice. These passages that we just covered are ones that those who choose to deny a creator God and a Messiah will point to as reasons that they could never follow a God like that. But I'm going to stand on my statement that I believe that we ought to be more amazed at his mercy than his justice. Each reading has some important things to consider in this portion. I'm sorry, but I'm going to move on to the clean and unclean. Are there any kind of thoughts on what we just shared there? I want to give everybody a fair shot. Wow. Okay. Each reading has many important things to consider. In this portion, the topic of clean and unclean is at the top of the list. Turn with me to Leviticus 11. I am going to read the whole chapter from Leviticus 11. I can find it. There it is. All right. Vicky and Jeff, can you see the Leviticus 11 up there now? Anybody?
Yes, we can see it.
All right, great. All right, Adonai spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying to them, speak to Bnei Israel, saying, these are the living things which you may eat among all the animals that are on the earth. Whatever has a split divided hoof, and chews cud among the animals that you may eat. Nevertheless, you should not eat of those that only chew cud or have a split hoof. The camel, though it chews the cud, does not have a divided hoof, is unclean to you. The coney, though it chews the cud, yet does not have a divided hoof, so it is unclean to you. The hare, though it chews the cud, does not split the hoof, so it is unclean to you. The pig, though it has a split divided hoof, does not chew cud, so it is unclean to you. You are not to eat meat from them, nor are you to touch their carcasses. They are unclean to you. From all that are in the waters you may eat whatever has fins and scales, within the waters, in the seas, and in the rivers. Those you may eat. But any that do not have fins and scales in the seas or the rivers, among those that swarm on the waters, or among any of the living creatures that are in the waters, they are loathsome to you. They are to be detestable to you. You shall not eat meat from them, and you should detest their carcasses. Whatever has neither fins nor scales in the water, that is detestable thing to you. Hold on, I usually pump this up a little bit. All right, there we go. Picking up verse 13, among the birds you should detest the following. They are not to be eaten. They are loathsome. The eagle, the vulture, the black vulture, the red kite, any kind of black kite, any kind of raven, the horned owl, the screech owl, the gull, any kind of hawk, the little owl, the cormorant, the great owl, the white owl, the desert owl, the osprey, the stork, any kind of heron, the hoopoe, and the bat. All flying insects that walk on all fours are detestable to you. Yet you may eat from all winged creeping things that go on all fours, which have legs above their feet, with which to hop on the earth. You may eat from any kind of locust, any kind of katydid, any kind of cricket, and any kind of grasshopper. But all winged creeping things that have 4 feet are loathsome to you. Moreover, by these also you will become unclean. Whoever touches their carcasses shall be unclean till the evening. Whoever carries any part of their carcass is to wash his clothes and will be unclean until the evening. Every animal with a separating hoof but not split, or does not chew the cud, is unclean to you. Everyone who touches them will become unclean. So whatever moves on its paws among all animals that go on all fours is unclean to you. Whoever touches their carcasses will be unclean until the evening. Whoever carries their carcasses is to wash his clothes and will be unclean until the evening. They are unclean to you. Among the creeping things that creep on the earth, the following are unclean to you: the weasel, the rat, any kind of great lizard, the gecko, the monitor lizard, the wall lizard, the skink, and the chameleon. Among all that creep, these are the ones that are unclean to you. Whoever touches them when they are dead will be unclean until the evening. Whatever falls on them when they are dead will become unclean, whether it is any vessel of wood or clothing or skin or sackcloth. Whatever vessel it is with which any work is done, it must be put into water, and it will be unclean until the evening. Then it will be clean. Now, if any of them falls into a clay pot, everything that is in it will become unclean, and you are to break it. Any food that may be eaten but has water on it from such a pot will become unclean. Also, any drink that may be drunk in any such pot will become unclean. Everything on which part of their carcass falls will become unclean. Any oven or stove for pots is to be broken in pieces. They are unclean and will be unclean to you. Nevertheless, a spring or a cistern for collecting water will be clean, though anyone who touches their carcass will become unclean. If part of a carcass falls on any seed for sowing that has yet to be sown, it is clean. But if water is put on the seed and part of a carcass falls on it, it is unclean to you. If any animal that you may eat dies, the one who touches its carcass will become unclean until the evening. He who eats of its carcass is to wash his clothes and be unclean until the evening. Also, the one who carries its carcass is to wash his clothes and be unclean until the evening. Every creeping thing that crawls on the earth is detestable. It should not be eaten. Whatever moves on its belly or crawls on all fours or has many feet among them, all the creeping things that crawl on the earth, these you are not to eat, for they are detestable. You are not to contaminate yourselves with any creeping thing that crawls, nor make yourselves unclean with them or defiled by them. For I am Adonai your God. Therefore sanctify yourselves and be holy, for I am holy. You are not to defile yourselves with any kind of creeping thing that moves on the earth. For I am Adonai, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt to be your God. Therefore you shall be holy, for I am holy. This is the Torah of the animal, the bird, every living creature that moves in the waters, and every creature that creeps on the earth, to make a distinction between the clean and the unclean, and between the living thing that may be eaten and the living thing that may not be eaten. It's always dangerous when I go off script, but just recall part of the passage from Matthew 5, starting at verse 17, with Yahushua says, I have not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. So just keep that in mind as we go forward. I want to take a closer look at 3 of these verses. 7, 8, and 39. The pig, though it has a split divided hoof, does not chew cud, so it is unclean to you. You are not to eat from them, nor are you to touch their carcasses. They are unclean to you. And then verse 39, if any animal that you may eat dies, the one who touches its carcass will become unclean until the evening. What is a carcass?
Dead body.
Yeah, here's the Hebrew word. It's a dead body, a corpse. How would you spell this? Any of my Hebrew scholars out there?
More guys.
Looks like Nabala.
Nabal, yes. How would you spell it?
Noon, bait, lamed, and it looks like hay. So Labala.
Nabella, yeah, Nabella, Nabala, depending on how you-
Nabala.
Okay, so that's just the word. So I just wanted to touch on carcass because it keeps coming up, carcass. A carcass is the body of a dead animal. Is a sirloin steak a carcass?
Well, part of it.
Is a pork chop a carcass?
No,
They're not. They're not a carcass.
Or not? Can I eat a sirloin steak?
Yes.
Can I eat a pork chop?
Yes.
Can I eat a pork chop?
Yeah. No.
Can I pet
Would
a cow?
to a body, an animal that was killed of itself, not
Slaughtered.
for meat.
Are you asking a question? I can't see your face. Jeff, are you asking a question? I can't.
Yeah, I was saying, as far as a carcass goes, would that be an animal that dies of itself, not one that is slain or slaughtered for meat?
yeah, I have the same
Would
question.
that be correct?
What are your thoughts based on the context and the word that you see defined here?
I think it's any dead animal body.
So is the sirloin steak unclean?
No,
No, it's
No.
not.
That was slaughtered for meat.
It's slaughtered for meat. So the question is the butcher who does the slaughtering unclean until sundown?
I wondered if verse 39 is talking about a clean animal that
That would not be the case.
not slaughtered, but just dies. That's what I always.
Verse 39, Stephanie's talking about, if any animal that you may eat dies, the one who touches its carcass will become unclean until the evening.
Like it was sick or.
So I personally draw a distinction, and maybe I'm wrong, and I remain teachable, that dying and being deaded or slaughtered are different.
I do too.
And that's the premise that I'm going on. So, and I may be wrong. Maybe the butcher's unclean, and maybe the butcher spends a lot of time being, between sundown and sunrise is the only time he's clean. So I don't know, but I don't think so. I think that dying and being deaded or being slaughtered are different. Okay, so we'll go on that assumption, and
what
I
were you
remain.
saying, Stephanie?
Well, if, I agree with what you're saying. You just go with, you go out here and you kill an animal to eat, or a priest goes out and slaughters an
Sacrifice.
animal.
He's certainly not in the.
That means he would be considered.
No,
unclean.
that's a great proof text. Great proof from Scripture is that he's slaughtering animals,
And he can't be unclean.
Clean.
and he's not going to be unclean. So there you go.
Yeah.
Case closed. I rest my
What?
case. Thank you.
What was said? We couldn't hear you.
The priest is slaughtering animals to sacrifice, and they're not unclean.
Clean, they can't be.
It can't be if they're going to continue into service.
That's true. That's true.
So,
So-
anyway, thanks.
You're all right.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to my question. Can I eat a sirloin steak?
Yes.
Can I eat a pork chop?
Yes.
Can I eat a pork chop? And
No.
Okay, no. Can I pet a cow?
Yes,
Yeah.
Can I
Yes.
Can I pet a pig? We go over to feed Lucy and Ethel, and we pet them?
yes,
Yes.
Yeah.
Can I raise cattle?
yes,
Can I be a pig
Yes.
farmer?
Yes.
Yes. Carcasses are unclean, whether the animal is permitted to be eaten for food or not. Very clear in verse 39. If any animal that you may eat dies, the one who touches its carcass will become unclean. If a cow dies in the field, does the farmer have to go do something with it?
yes.
Yes. Is he going to be unclean biblically till sundown? Yes.
Yes.
Does that mean he's in a state of sin? No.
No,
Okay. So I just want to kind of bracket things a little bit here. The primary foods, okay, carcasses are unclean, whether the animal is permitted to be eaten for food or not.
It's dead.
Live animals are not unclean to touch. The primary foods, if we have to take all that whole chapter and kind of summarize it, that we choose to abstain from, or that God has commanded us to abstain from, are pork and shellfish. There are some additional ones, such as catfish, but I'd never like catfish anyway. So keeping away from those things is pretty simple. When it gets challenging, though, is when parts of clean animals are used in other grocery items. Is the casing on your chicken sausage from pork, for example?
Yeah, it's hard to
No,
tell.
gotta find out.
Not mine.
Vera found a resource at the Torah Sisters website. Here's what it looks like. Hold on. And I will send you the link. And I'm going to show you the list. But per their instructions, they ask individuals not to redistribute the downloaded, but to have you go. It's free. You can see you just put it in your cart for $0 and you download it. It's a 33-page list of foods that are clean and products that are not clean or have unclean ingredients. Let me show you what it looks like. And they just ask for grace because they've done as much due diligence as they can, and maybe they've missed something. But it will give you specific grocery items like Aldi food, Aunt Maple's 2% maple syrup is the top of the list. It's good. It's clean. But if you go down to Dominic's refrigerated pie shells, and pie shells are notorious for this, they have pork. You can get beef lard. They're lard from pork is in there. Fleming Company's gelatin, pork, Gel-Cert Royal Gelatins all have pork in their gelatin. All Jello brand at the bottom is unclean. Lowry's seasonings are pretty clean. Lee and Perrin's Worcestershire sauce is fine.
Oh, thank God.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really. Now, fortunately, if you look down here in the middle of the page, Jet Puffed Marshmallow Cream is clean. So praise Yah for that. Anyway, so it's quite a list. I'll say it's 33 pages. I'm not going to go through it. You look at McCormick's bag gravies are unclean.
Oh, and their chili sauces. Oh,
So these are things that we have in the past used, and we're going to have to be careful.
Wow.
It's difficult to find, powdered gravy mixes that are good. But they're out there, trust me, you just have to know where to get them. Knox Gelatin has beef and pork in it. Anyway, the list goes on, but I want to make you aware of this resource. I'll drop you the link to that Torah Sisters link so you can download it and look at it yourself. And you kind of read their disclaimer. They've done their best, and this is really quite a service. A1 steak sauce is clean. Ocean Spray cranberry juice is clean. Anyway, you'll just look at the list and you'll go, I never thought of that. So the challenge of staying away from pork and shellfish is easy. The challenge of staying away from food products that have been contaminated with natural flavors like beaver.
Stephanie wants
next
I
one.
like how they put on there the Jello is unclean. Because one thing with the Jello brand, a lot of people that are new with Torah observance, they think that if it says the K on there, that it's clean, that means kosher.
Yeah.
See, if you look at a lot of the Jello products, it will have the K for kosher on the Jello.
Really?
Really?
Yes.
Not sure if you can hear Stephanie, but she's saying a lot of the Jello products will have a K indicating kosher on it, and they're really not.
There is a rabbinical thing that is floating around in the last many years.
Oh.
Where because gelatin is so far away from being an animal anymore,
That it's
that
really,
it really doesn't,
it's kosher pig, in other words.
they don't consider it food anymore.
Oh, nice.
So that's why they consider it.
Wow.
I disagree with it, but that's
Well,
a
yeah.
rabbinical junk. So a lot of times when it says kosher, you still have to read the labels, and you might even have to call the company and ask them what type of gelatin do you use.
Yeah, and I have asked, typically online I've asked, and most companies have been responsive. Yeah. Cream soda, if you look here, it's bolded, is unclean because it has castoreum, which is from beavers. It's unclean. And then you'll see one here like Guinness beer, that they have removed isinglass from catfish from their beer. So, I mean, some manufacturers are responsive to customer requests. Others are like Jell-O, where they just
Why do we have to have?
spy off the rabbis to get them certified kosher. So that's a great point. Is this whole kosher certification is not something that I'm crazy about, because it's a rabbinic money machine. I don't know how to say it nicely, with all due respect. I don't mean to cast all rabbis in that lot. There are enough of them out there. Okay, so I'll share that list. That's pretty cool. I'm going to offer an opinion about a couple things, and tilapia was mentioned in here, which is biblically clean. But I'm going to offer an opinion about fish and other meats in general. Personally, Vera and I think that farm-raised fish, salmon and tilapia are the most common, are nasty. In some ways, in some cases, the fish have been genetically modified to enhance their growth characteristics. So we do not knowingly eat farm-raised fish. On the same vector, cows are being genetically modified as well. I mentioned that earlier when I was in our time of prayer. And what about chickens raised in coops? As I've said before, I believe that anything that takes you away from the God of creation is bad. Yah did not make chicken coops on the sixth day, just chickens. He didn't make feedlots for cows, he made grass. So it's getting challenging, and believe me, I will stand on my prophecy here that it is going to get more challenging as the days go on to eat in a Yah-honoring way. So I'll offer that resource to you for your use and edification. All right, back to the slides. I'm going to go briefly here to this verse in Matthew 3. Now, John wore clothing from camel's hair and a leather belt. This is John the Immerser. A leather belt around his waist, and his food was locusts and wild honey. Did John the Immerser eat unclean creatures, locusts? Yuck. Not at all. Remember back from Leviticus 11 that we did read, you may eat from any kind of locust, any kind of katydid, and any kind of cricket, and any kind of grasshopper. As a way of honoring John the Immerser, next Shabbat, we're going to have chocolate-covered grasshoppers for dessert, so you don't want to miss that. All right, I'm going to go, again, always dangerous. I'm going to go off script here a little bit. Stephanie, I, and Vera had a little conversation earlier. Give me just a minute to get this. We're going to go to Mark chapter 7. Mark chapter 7, do some reading from there. And then we'll come back to this. If I can type it in. Mark chapter 7. Okay, so I'll read here the first 23 verses. Now the Pharisees and some of the Torah scholars, these are people that Yahusha constantly railed against, the Pharisees and the Torah scholars. Had come from Jerusalem and gathered around Yeshua, and they saw that some of his disciples were eating bread with unclean hands, that is, not washed. For the Pharisees and all Jewish people do not eat unless they wash their hands up to the elbow, keeping the tradition of the elders. And when they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they perform a ritual washing. There are many other traditions they have received and hold, such as the washing of cups, pitchers, copper vessels. The Pharisees and Torah scholars questioned Yeshua, why don't your disciples walk according to the tradition of the elders? Why do they eat bread with unwashed hands? And he, this is Yeshua, Yahusha, said to them, rightly did Isaiah prophesy about you hypocrites. As it is written, this people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. And in vain they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. Having left behind the commandment of God, you hold on to the tradition of men. He was also telling them, you set aside the commands of God in order that you may validate your own tradition. For Moses said, honor your father and your mother, and he who speaks evil of father and mother must be put to death. But you say, if anyone tells his father or mother, whatever you have gained from me is korban, that is an offering to God, then you no longer permit him to do anything for his father or mother, making void the word of God with your tradition that you've handed down. You may do many things, many such things. And we spoke about the korban, in other words, giving money to Pharisees and Torah scholars instead of taking care of your mother and father was not the intent. Talked about that a week or two ago. Then Yeshua called the crowd again and began saying to them, hear me, everyone, and understand. So here he's got hear, and we know from our Shema, hear means to hear and obey. There is nothing outside the man that can make him unholy by going into him. Rather, it is what come out of the man that makes the man unholy. When he had left the crowd and entered the house, his disciples questioned him about the parable. And he said to them, are you also lacking understanding? Don't you grasp that whatever goes into the man cannot make him unholy? For it doesn't enter the heart, but into the stomach, and then goes out into the sewer, cleansing all foods. And here, in some translations, there is a parenthetical insertion, thus Jesus declared all foods clean. And that's where Stephanie and I and Vera had a discussion. But continuing, and he continued, isn't that where it was in verse 19, Stephanie?
Yes.
And he continued, it is what comes out of the man that makes the man unholy. For from within, out of the heart of men, come evil intentions, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, wickedness, deceit, lustfulness, envy, slander, pride, and foolishness. All these evil things come from within and make the man unholy. Let me go shift to a different version, and we'll look at that verse 19 again.
That's what I was trying to do.
It's parenthetical.
So go down here. This is a complete Jewish Bible, and read verse 19 again. It doesn't go into his heart, but into his stomach and passes out into the latrine. Thus he declared all foods ritually clean. So discussion. This is one, and I had a class at Dallas taught by the president of the seminary at the time, where I couldn't get, and this was actually in person, I couldn't get my waving hand to catch his eye. And he was preaching the Gospels. That was kind of his area of expertise, was the Gospels. And we went over this passage. So the whole discussion here is not about changing unclean animals into clean animals. Never does he say that, because I stressed Matthew 5, 17 through 20, where he did not abolish the law, but he came to fulfill it. He's talking about this hand washing ritual. The food is not made unclean biblically. A food is not made unclean biblically by having dirty hands. Now, if you are unclean because you just picked up carcass of an animal and you pick up food, that food would then become unclean. But that's not what's in view here. So he didn't declare all animals ritually clean, even if that parenthetical expression is in fact part of the original manuscripts, and some have it in, some don't. He did not declare all animals clean. He declared all food, that which has previously been defined as food, clean, with or without this ritualistic hand washing that was passed down from the elders. So any questions about that? If that's something that you may hear from those of little faith, if you will. Anything else we talked about, Stephanie? That kind of the crux? All right, I'm going to go back to Samuel, and we're going to go into chapter 7 now. 2 Samuel 7, I'm going to read the first 17 verses. Now it came about when the king lived in his palace, and Adonai had granted him rest from all his enemies around him. Who's the king here? Oh, it says right there, David. All right. That the king said to the prophet Nathan, "See now, I am living in a house of cedar, yet the ark of God remains within curtains. Go, do all that is in your heart." Nathan said to the king, "For Adonai is with you." But it came to pass that same night that the word of Adonai came to Nathan, saying, "Go tell my servant David, thus says Adonai, are you to build me a house for me to dwell in? Since the day that I brought up the children of Israel from Egypt, to this day I have not dwelt in a house, but have been moving about in a tent, even in a tabernacle. In all my journeying among all the children of Israel, did I ever speak a word to any of the tribes of Israel, whom I commanded to shepherd my people Israel, saying, why have you not built me a house of cedar?" Anybody know the answer to that? Did he ever say that?
No.
He did not. So now, thus you shall say to my servant David, thus says Adonai Sabaoth, I took you from the pasture, from following the sheep, to be ruler over my people, over Israel. I have been with you wherever you went, and have cut off all your enemies from before you. And I will make your name as great as the greatest on earth. I will set up a place for my people Israel, and I will plant them, so that they may dwell in their own place and not be disturbed again. Nor will the children of wickedness afflict them any more as in the past, since the day that I commanded judges to be over my people Israel. So I will give you the rest from all your enemies. Moreover, Adonai declares to you that Adonai will make a house for you. When your days are done and you sleep with your fathers, I will raise up your seed who will come forth from you after you, and I will establish his kingdom. He will build a house for my name, and I will establish his royal throne forever. I will be a father to him, and he will be a son to me. If he commits iniquity, I will correct him with the rod of men and with the strokes from sons of men. Yet my loving kindness will not be withdrawn from him, as I withdrew it from Saul, whom I removed from before you. So your house and your kingship will be secure forever before you. Your throne will be established forever. Just so Nathan spoke all these words and all this vision to David. First, verses 8 through 16, let me just put them in view there, 8 through 16. Generally are referred to as the Davidic covenant, which is the covenant Yahuwah made with David to establish his dynasty and ensure its continuation. Verse 16 is especially important to consider. There are three words that frame a proper understanding of this covenant, and one word that establishes its duration. First, the words house, kingship, and throne need to be considered. House refers to David's physical descendants. Throne refers to his right to rule, and kingdom or kingship refer to the political body David would rule over and over which David's descendants would successively rule. Second, the word forever occurs three times in this passage, once in verse 13 and twice in verse 16. How long is forever? Forever.
Forever. Eternity.
The Davidic covenant is known as an unconditional covenant. It's a one-way deal in which Yah declares what he will do without any conditions placed on the other party. In this case, David and his descendants. Good thing, because if the covenant was conditional based on the obedience and faithfulness of the nation of Israel, it would not have lasted long. Luke 1 is the ultimate fulfillment of this covenant, and I'll just read the last these handful of verses. Then in the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent to Adonai into a town in the Galilee named Nazareth, and to a virgin engaged to a man named Joseph of the house of David. The virgin's name was Miriam. Coming to her, the angel said, "Shalom, favored one, Adonai is with you." But at the message, she was perplexed and kept wondering what kind of greeting this might be. The angel spoke to her, "Do not be afraid, Miriam, for you have found favor with God. Behold, you will become pregnant and give birth to a son, and you shall call his name Yeshua. He will be great and will be called Ben Elyon, Son of the Most High. Adonai Elohim will give him the throne of David, his father. He shall reign over the house of Jacob for all eternity, and his kingdom shall be without end." We see the phrase "for all eternity" in this last verse, which sounds a whole lot like "forever" to me. And as I said, the title Ben Elyon in verse 32 means Son of the Most High God. All right, turn to Acts 10. Acts 10. I'm going to read the first 5 verses. Now in Caesarea, there was a man named Cornelius, a centurion of what was called the Italian cohort. He was a devout man, revering God with all his household. He gave tzedakah generously to the people and prayed to God continually. And we talked about the word tzedakah a week or 2 ago, which means charity. Basically, he was generous with his resources. About the 9th hour of the day, he saw clearly in a vision an angel of God coming and saying to him, "Cornelius." He stared at him in terror and said, "What is it, Lord?" The angel said to him, "Your prayers in tzedakah have gone up as a memorial offering before God. Now send men to Joppa and call for Simon, also named Peter. He is being entertained as a guest by Simon the tanner, whose house is beside the sea." When the angel speaking to him had left, he called 2 of his servants and a soldier from among those attached to his command. After he explained everything to them, he sent them to Joppa. On the next day, as the soldiers were traveling and approaching the city, Peter went up to the rooftop to pray. At about the 6th hour, now he became very hungry and wanted to eat, but while they were preparing something, he fell into a trance. He saw the heavens open and something like a great sheet coming down, lowered by its 4 corners to the earth. In it were all sorts of 4-footed animals and reptiles and birds of the air. A voice came to him, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." But Peter said, "Certainly not, Lord, for never have I eaten anything unholy or unclean." Again, a voice came to him a second time, "What God has made clean, you must not consider unholy." This happened 3 times, and the sheet was immediately taken up to heaven. Now, while Peter was puzzling about what the vision he had seen might mean, behold, the men sent by Cornelius found Simon's house and appeared before the gate. They called out and began to ask whether Simon, also called Peter, was staying in this place as a guest. Now, while Peter was mulling over the vision, the Ruach said to him, Look here, 3 men are looking for you. But get up, go downstairs, and go with them without hesitating, because I myself have sent them." Going down to the men, Peter said, "Here, I'm the one you're looking for. What is the reason for your coming?" And they said, "Cornelius, a centurion, a righteous and God-fearing man, well spoken of by all the Jewish people, was directed by a holy angel to summon you to his house and to hear a message from you." So Peter invited them in to be his guests. The next day, he got up and went with them, and some of the brothers from Joppa accompanied. The following day, he entered Caesarea. Cornelius was waiting for them and had called together his relatives and close friends. As Peter pulled him up, saying, as Peter entered, Cornelius met him and fell down at his feet and worshiped him. But Peter pulled him up, saying, "Stand up, I too am just a man." Talking with him, Peter went inside and found many people gathered. He said to them, "You yourselves know that it is not permitted for a Jewish man to associate with a non-Jew or to visit him. Yet God has shown me that I should call no one unholy or unclean. So I came without objection when I was sent for. I asked them, 'What is the reason why you sent me?' Cornelius declared, 4 days ago at this hour, I was praying mincha in my house. Suddenly a man stood in front of me in shining clothes. He said, 'Cornelius, your prayers have been heard, and your tzedakah remembered before God. Therefore send to Joppa and ask for Simon, who is also called Peter. He is staying in the house of Simon the tanner by the sea. So I sent for you immediately, and you have been kind enough to come.' Now then, we are all here before God to hear all that you have commanded by the Lord. Then Peter opened his mouth and said, I truly understand that God is not one to show favoritism, but in every nation, the one who fears him and does what is right and acceptable to him. This passage is often used by well-meaning but misinformed Christians or even unbelievers to challenge the validity of the continuation of the dietary laws laid out in Leviticus, which we read earlier. First, they often believe these instructions applied only to the Jews to begin with, which we know is not what the Bible says. Second, they point to verse 13. Get up, Peter, kill and eat, as confirmation that the dietary laws no longer apply to anyone, Jew or not. But they miss what follows in verse 28. Scroll down there. In which Peter provides the proper interpretation of his dream. The vision was about people, not food. I'll read 28 again. He said to them, this is Cornelius and his family relatives that had gathered, you yourselves know that it is not permitted for a Jewish man to associate with a non-Jew or to visit him. Whose rule was that?
The rabbis.
Okay, the rabbis. Yet God has shown me that I should call no one unholy or clean. So I came without objection when I was sent for. Okay. Why would Yahuwah provide a passage such as this, and there are many others, that, while perfectly clear to the reader who wants to read out of his word rather than read into it, seems to provide instructions contrary to his word? I mean, he could have sent Peter a different vision, right? So why would he use unclean animals in a sheet as a means to tell Peter not to consider any man, regardless of their ethnic background, unholy or unclean?
Maybe they considered, in his cultural viewpoint, he considered, I think I read in the Talmud that goyim were considered animals, like unclean animals. I read that in the Talmud somewhere.
That's a good point. There was a parallel in the culturally then between unclean animals and goyim.
Goyim, yeah.
So that would resonate. That would make it clear to him that the goyim were not to be considered unclean.
I wish I remember where this information come from in my brain. It was somebody that read something and it was about some history with the Jewish people. Something that had took place in history, not long, it had happened before Yeshua. And there was persecution or something from some Gentiles. And before that, the Jewish people did talk to the Gentiles about the Lord, because the Lord wanted them to be a light to the nations.
Right.
You know? And there was a rabbinical thing that had hit, and to keep from the persecution and all from happening, they made this rabbinical thing where it was not good to bring the word to the Gentiles. It's only for the Jewish people and so on and so forth. I'm gonna have to look
Okay.
that up.
Okay.
It was interesting.
I think this wasn't a question that, this was a rhetorical question. I'm not sure I have an answer for it. I think at least part of it, I think Vera's point's a great one. This analogy would have been culturally very meaningful to Peter with unclean animals and what Peter had been taught by the traditions of man to be unclean man. So it was a perfect parallel, and would have been very culturally appropriate for Peter. And I think there's other places where, I mean, Yahushua's question, why do you speak in parables? Is this because they won't get it? I think that Yah wants us to dig a little bit. when I tutor in math, I ask questions and let them figure out the answers based on the understanding of the principles that we've laid out and discussed. So I think it's important for us to be able to eat the meat and not just drink the milk. So all those are good. Thank you. Okay. In the interest of time, as I mentioned, I'm not going to address the Galatians 2:11 through 16 passage, but I do ask you to reread it with two thoughts in mind. One, hypocrisy is contagious, and two, the law doesn't bring salvation. So if you see those 2 points in those verses, great. I'm going to take a closer look at 3 verses from 1 Peter 1. So if you want to turn there, I'll bring them up on the screen. Okay, 1 Peter 1, this is verses 14, 15, and 16 in the Tree of Life version. Like obedient children, do not be shaped by the cravings you had formerly in your ignorance. Instead, just like the Holy One who called you, be holy yourselves also in everything you do. For it is written, Kedoshim you shall be, for I am Kadosh. Here it is in the King James Version. As obedient children, not fashioning yourselves according to the former lusts in your ignorance, but as he which hath called you is holy, so be ye holy in all manner of conversation, because it is written, be ye holy, for I am holy. Here are 2 verses from our reading earlier in Leviticus 11. For I am Adonai your God, therefore sanctify yourselves and be holy, for I am holy. You are not to defile yourselves with any kind of creeping thing that moves on the earth. For I am Adonai who brought you up out of the land of Egypt to be your God. Therefore you shall be holy, for I am holy. So Peter is not making up some new stuff here. He says, for it is written, be ye holy, for I am holy. And he's going back, hearkening back to, among other places, the passage in Leviticus that we reviewed today. So I stand on my frequent assertion that to properly understand the New Testament, or the Brit Hadashah, you have to have a very good understanding of the Old Testament. Kadosh, or holy, or set apart, is a topic we keep coming back to. More precisely, it is a topic Yah keeps coming back to. Perhaps, maybe, it is important to him. I am finished. I'm going to go to my closing thoughts and a little discussion about Passover in next week's reading. But is there any discussion about anything that we've talked about or didn't talk about that you thought we should have?
Bill, I'd like to.
Hold on.
Go ahead.
Yeah, he can hear me.
I can hear you.
Bill, I'd like to reference something from chapter 11, talking about an unclean animal that is unclean for food, called the mouse. That animal, I believe, also is talking about a squirrel as to being an unclean animal for food. Just as
What verse are you looking at? I have it up there on the screen.
it was.
And it's interesting, and is that in different translations, the animals have different names. So I don't have any idea what.
Yeah, it's 29. It's 11 verse 29.
All right, the weasel, the rat, any kind of great lizard. That's what this has. But this is the TLV.
Yeah, my translation it says, and these are unclean to you among the creeping creatures that creep on the earth, the mole and the mouse and the tortoise after its kind. Verse 9.
Yeah, and this is King James version now. That says the weasel,
You have
the
the
mouse, and the
weasel on
tortoise,
there.
the ferret, the snail, and the mole.
Yeah, the mole, the mouse, and the tortoise. The mole and the mouse, I believe, includes animals like raccoons, and also the squirrel as being an unclean animal to eat.
And possum and fox, and yeah, I don't think they meet the the hoof being split and chewing the cud test.
Right. I think the squirrel would fall closer in the category as the rabbit or the hare,
Mhm.
the the type of animal it is. The the reason I mention that as the mouse, because there's a verse in Yeshayahu chapter 65 that references unclean animals as being a mouse. And you may be familiar with that verse. It's in chapter 66, and it reads,
Which verse is it? I'll pull it up. If everybody
it's it's actually 16 and 17. For by fire and by his sword Yahuwah shall judge all flesh, and the slain of Yahuwah shall be many. Those who set themselves apart and cleanse themselves at the gardens after one in the midst, eating the flesh of pigs, and the abomination and the mouse are snatched away together. That verse there denotes that.
I was looking for that verse last week and I couldn't find it because I was looking in the wrong book. I was in the back of the Bible. Thank you. Yep.
Yeah,
Hmm.
that's a direct reference to the mouse being unclean food,
Yep.
and I believe that the squirrel is included in that. See, there's many people that eat the squirrel here in this area. They
Oh, yeah.
and eat the squirrel in this area. My grandfather would occasionally eat squirrel meat, and and I believe that the mouse includes the squirrel as an unclean animal to eat.
Nobody's arguing here that squirrel's unclean.
Well, squirrels is in the same scientific
Oh.
category.
I can't hear you, Seth. I can't hear you. I know they
As a
can't.
rabbit or a mouse?
Squirrels are in the same category as the mice, right?
Yeah,
no, that's what
We're in
I thought.
violation,
Rodent.
Jeff. Now, that's interesting that I didn't even use this in my example. Can you pet a pig? I said, can you pet a rabbit? Are rabbits clean or unclean in terms of meat?
Unclean.
Clean.
Rabbit's unclean.
They're unclean. Can you have a pet rabbit? Can you pet a rabbit?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Well,
Well, if
wait
you
a
can pet
minute.
a pig, you can pet a rabbit.
Horses are unclean.
Horses are unclean.
Exactly.
But if it's dead, you're not supposed to touch it.
Well, yeah.
But Yeshua is coming back on a horse.
But it's not a horse carcass. He's not gonna ride on a cart. He could make it
No,
fly,
no,
but he's not going to.
no, but I'm just saying.
Yeah.
He's
So
coming back on unclean.
I should have used the rabbit because the Overly family doesn't include just Stephanie and 4 amazing children, but Twitch the rabbit. So and dogs. We have dogs and cats. I mean, there's the okay. Good point, Jeff. Thanks. No squirrel. If you have Brunswick stew here, we're not going to have squirrel in it. I promise you. All right. Let me go to my final
Wait,
thoughts.
hey, Stephanie's got a question.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I know that it's okay to pet unclean animals, but when you are a priest that has to sacrifice things, were they allowed, have y'all ever read anything anywhere? I know there's nothing in the Bible on it, but maybe in historical stuff. Were they allowed to pet dogs and cats and,
Ooh,
other unclean types of animals people use as pets?
just let it be.
Were the priests allowed to pet dogs? Is that the
Yeah,
question?
were they allowed to pet live unclean animals? Have y'all ever heard anything like
No,
that?
I have never heard
in
it.
historical stuff?
From my understanding of what we just read, there would be no Torah prohibition against them petting. And they could pet a vulture if they wanted to. A live vulture. If they wanted to pet a
It's
possum,
just don't touch the dates
it's a carcass.
or
It's the
eat.
carcass. Yeah. Okay. It's a great discussion. It's things that, even in preparing for this, things that I had not fully thought about. I thought I knew what I needed, and I do know what I need to know for the most part, but there are some nuances there, like what's this with horses? Are we allowed to? Yeah, we can have horses. Now, situation came where a number of years ago, we had to put one of our horses down. So then we have a carcass. It turns out we didn't touch it. But we had to dispose of it, which we did. We took care of it. But anyway, great discussion. And just be careful. If Jeff brings any Brunswick stew over for Shabbat, be careful what's in it. If I could try to slip some squirrel and some raccoon in there. Okay, my final thoughts. There are many other things you could get from this. These are my final thoughts. Often you'll hear people say the devil is in the details. I think that's wrong. I think Yah is in the details. If you remember back to my discussion about Nadab and Abihu and Uzzah and Ananias and Sapphira, and you go, how could a loving God do that? Well, because means what he says, and he says what he means. He provides instructions, and that we should be thankful for his mercy, not worried about his justice.
His mercy always balances his justice.
We talked about, you've often heard another adage is cleanliness is next to godliness, and you generally think of people thinking of physical cleanliness and how clean their home is, and Stephanie's here and she knows how to make a home physically clean. But cleanliness, really, we're talking about being biblically clean and eating biblically clean is my focus when I think of cleanliness being next to godliness. So is there an element of the other, the physical cleanliness? I think there is, but Yahusha railed against the Pharisees and the Torah scholars about worrying about having their hands washed before eating. So the cleanliness that's in focus, I think, in that adage is biblical cleanliness. And so I started out with, does Yah care what we eat? And my conclusion is, yes, he does care what we eat, because, and perhaps the biggest punchline is, we are to be holy as he is holy. And we kind of went through a couple iterations of that from the New Testament, from the Old Testament to the New Testament back to the Old. Okay, those are my thoughts. Again, there are others that you may have. I hope you got more from it. I asked about to read the Galatians, and don't forget that means that I would hope you would get out of that passage that hypocrisy is contagious, so don't get caught in the swirl of naysayers who will be hypocritical, or they will they'll live in a spirit of fear rather than hope. And I also want you to get from that passage that the law is not our means of salvation. It is what we do as a result of our salvation, what we get to do. Okay, just a reminder, Tuesday, we're going to gather. Please if you get here a little early, actually, and we'll socialize and have some snacks, and then I'm finishing up my teaching. It's going to be fairly unconventional, different from what we've done in the past, and then we will eat, and it's going to be a killer meal. So thank you to all who have contributed or who are going to bring things. I really appreciate it. It's going to be awesome. So I don't plan to Zoom the teaching, but I'm contemplating recording it. If I do, I'll share the link. I intended that for those who are normal Zoom partners that don't happen to be on the call today. So one reason would be to allow those not able to attend to watch. And the second would be for you to use as an outreach to others who may find it interesting and edifying. Okay, double portion next week. So we got a laundry list. I'll send it out soon.
Wow, that's right.
Okay, any closing thoughts from anyone? Okay, let me close this in prayer and then I'll sign off here. Abba Father, we once again we thank you. Wow, for this set apart day that you've given us. We thank you for the edifying conversation that we have. We just pray that all that we've said and all that we think we come away from is holy and from you, and that you would quickly purge anything from us that is not. Pray that we continue to test all things and hold preciously tight to that which is true. The truth is elusive, and man can be deceitful. Our hearts are deceitful and wicked. So we just cling to your truth. Thank you for giving it to us. Pray that we will be faithful to take out of your word that which you've intended for us to know, and not seek to read into your word that which we want to hear, to justify our own beliefs, but rather that we are lockstep with what you want us to know. Pray that you continue to watch over all the people that are with us today and those that couldn't join us. Protect them, guide our every step, every one of us. Pray that we seek continually your face. We pray continuously. We pray without ceasing. We would know you in a way that you have created us to know you, to have intimate fellowship with you, so that we may be holy because you are holy. We are so thankful for that. We thank you for your mercy. We love you. And we love all of you who are on this call, and we look forward to being with you, most of you anyway, or hopefully all of you on Tuesday. And look forward to you then. We just lift up all these prayers in the name of our Son, your Son, our Messiah, Yahushua Mashiach. Amen.